Hope everyone's well who's tuned in. So that's next Monday. But right now, I have the music man himself, the man who wrote Rock and Roll Unravelled, and I'm bringing him right in, Derek Shelmerdine. And there he is.
Hi, Frank.
Hi, Derek.
Great to see you again, mate.
Oh, and yeah, it's absolutely wonderful. Did you hear me? I forgot who you're talking about tonight. I'm awfully sorry.
Oh, not a problem. It's a really interesting one, really. It's a band that's absolutely never been a cool band to be into.
Yeah.
But Virgin Singles, the book published in 2010, this particular one, it says that no group has had more UK chart singles than this particular group. And also went on to say that only the Beatles and the Stones have had more top 20 LPs. And would you believe that is Status Quo?
Go away.
Yeah, absolutely incredible.
I love the Quo. I love the
absolutely.
Quo.
I mean, they have got a really, really interesting backstory as well.
Really? Are we going to learn about it today?
Oh, gosh, yes, yes. I mean, they sort of fell apart 3 times, but something popped up and, you know, they recovered and went on to even greater things each time. And they go back a long way. I mean, they go back to 1962. They started out as the Scorpions. And that was Alan Lancaster, who was a long-time member of it. He's the Brian Jones of the Quo. He's the guy who founded the Status Quo, Alan Lancaster. And with his little mate, Alan Key, they joined a school band and they sort of formed a trad jazz band as well. And that morphed into a beat group, we're talking 62, called the Scorpions. And that's when Francis Rossi joined. So the picture's starting to build a bit. And then sort of back end of 62, 63, they called themselves the Spectres. And that's when another original-ish member, John Coghlan, joined. And there's personnel changes going along. But they beavered away for a few years. And in 1965, the Spectres got a 4-week, I think it was, residency at Minehead Butlins. And that's when Roy Lines joined them, a guy called Jess Jaworski, who had been in from pretty much the early days. He moved on. And it was at Butlins that they met Rick Parfitt. He's an interesting guy. I mean, at the time, he was calling himself Ricky Harrison. And he was in a sort of cabaret act called The Highlights with two ladies who were not sisters, who were positioned themselves sort of as twins. So they called themselves The Highlights. And he was a canary at the Sunshine Holiday Camp the previous year. That's like a red coat. So, I mean, his career, actually, Rick Parfitt's career goes back to 11 years old. He was on the TV with Steve Race. That's a name from
Steve Race, yeah.
Yeah, and he sang Travelling Light, apparently, Cliff Richard. And what's interesting, I was reading a bit of a biography of him recently. And he said, you know, he's really into Cliff Richard. And then he discovered Billy Fury. And he became a big Billy Fury fan. So I thought that was good fun. And then 66, the Spectres cut, 66 and 67, they cut 3 singles, did absolutely nothing. So they decided to change their name to Traffic. Unfortunately for them, this is around the March of 67. In the April of 67, Stevie Winwood left the Spencer Davis group and he formed a group called Traffic. And obviously, you know, he was pretty well known at the time. So the NME, Melody Maker and the like were doing a lot of publicity. So they decided that they'd extend the name, not just to be called Traffic. They extended the name to be called Traffic Jam. And they released the sort of prophetically titled single, Almost But Not Quite There, which I thought was rather nice. And then November 67, they become Status Quo. Still haven't had any hit records or anything, but they're now Status Quo. And the band we sort of know and love really starts from there. And they started off as a psychedelic band. So we're now.
That's right. I remember them. I remember them with the, you know, they always had these funny haircuts, didn't they? You know, those bands at the time.
Yeah.
You know, well groomed and, you know, if you know what I mean.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
yeah, I remember them.
Yeah. And I mean, their first hit single was Pictures of Matchstick Men.
Yeah,
Which was a great, it was classic 1967
yeah.
English psychedelia. I mean, it gave them a number 7, so top 10 with their first single, so that's no bad thing. And it was actually their only US hit. It's their only Billboard Top 40 hit. It gave them a number 12 in America. But like so many British bands, they could be really successful all around the world without ever really cracking the American market. So what we're looking at now is the first, if you like, classic lineup of the Quo, which is Alan Lancaster bass, the guy that started it all, sort of in order they joined. Francis Rossi, very much guitar, lead guitar. Roy Lines, keyboards. John Coghlan, drums. And Rick Parfitt, who only joined just before they became famous, basically. So I wouldn't go as far as say he was in the right place at the right time. But, you tend to think of Parfitt and Rossi as the status quo. But really, these other guys have had quite an input. And in these early days, they'd had some little bit of commercial success, but they were working as backing band for various artists. And famously, they worked quite a bit, apparently, at the time with Madeleine Bell. But what's interesting about the Quo was they started off very much as a psychedelic group, Pictures of Matchstick Men. And then they really, the early records, 68, 69, they were very much a pop group. Ice in the Sun gave them the number 8 in 68. Are You Growing Tired of My Love was only a 46. I mean, better than nothing, obviously, but not a big hit in 69. And then their second album, Spare Parts, that didn't do very well either. So they decided it was time for a change. And that's when they started to move towards, the boogie feel that everybody knows and loves them for. I mean, previously, apart from that sort of hippie era, after that, it was very much clean cut, short hair, sharp suits. And they decided that they ditched that, grow long hair, wear denims, and shake their head up and down. And they became much more sort of blues tinged. And they had a hit in the May of 70, gave them a number, their fourth hit gave them a number 12. And that very much is, you can hear the boogie, sort of blues tinged boogie coming down with that. And same year, they released another album, Mark Kelly's Greasy Spoon. I mean, some of these albums have great names. And that didn't really go very far. So Roy Lines decided to quit the band and he moved on. And then there's a really interesting development. This is effectively where Andy Bown comes on the scene. But they never technically replaced Roy Lines on the keyboard. They became a quartet. And the next 10 years is very much, they're referred to as the Frantic Four years. And Andy Bown very much features on, if you look at the credits on their albums across that decade, the 70s, Andy Bown's on pretty much, I think, all of them. And he was out on the road with them as well. But he was never, not till later, an official member of the band. And it's also another time of change because Roy Lines moved on because they weren't really getting anywhere. They were with Pye. Originally, the Spectres had signed to Piccadilly, which is sort of part of the Pye, or became part of the Pye Record Company area. So that's probably why they were with Pye. But they weren't having an awful lot of success. And in 72, they moved over to Vertigo. I don't know if anybody who's sort of into collecting albums or 70s music, Vertigo is one of those specialist labels, and it had the famous swirl on the one side, the label design on the record itself. One side of it would have a swirl, and it was also, Vertigo was quite famous for being a prog label. So they were sort of mixing with heavier sounding people, I think, which probably helped them develop their particular style. And now by 72, they really are playing a sort of much heavier brand of blues and boogie. And they received critical acclaim at the Reading Festival in 72. So, you know, they're now really starting to take shape. And
well, can Derek,
yep.
excuse me, can I tell you when, you know, as you said, matchstick men,
pictures of,
yeah, you know, from that like psychedelic era.
Yeah.
And then the first time I've ever seen them, like in change to the long hair and the proper rock, shall I say, the proper rock is Down Down.
Yeah.
Down Down. That particular song, absolutely brilliant. And the drumming in that, it's exceptional, the drummer in that. And also the bass guitar, absolutely brilliant. Yeah. And that's when I said, these are fantastic. Yeah. And ever since then, you know, because to me, they were just like an ordinary group until the long hair, you know, until the rock came out, the proper rock I'm talking about Status Quo. And it was that particular Down Down that really got me into Quo. And I used to follow 3 bands, right? And it sounds daft, honestly. It sounds daft. Quo, Rainbow, and ELO.
Well, there's a range.
There's a range, yeah, of course. All the O's. Absolutely brilliant. I'm sorry there today, but can I just mention a few names here?
Oh, absolutely.
Looking forward to Derek coming on, says Mark Kinnish. Hi, Derek. Always great when you come on, says Mark. Charlie Cairns, welcome back, Derek. Right, and Mikey Lees, good evening, Derek. Yes. Looking forward to you sharing your knowledge. And that even goes from me, that because you know what you're saying. I always thought, you've surprised me here, if you don't mind me saying. I always thought that Francis Rossi and Rick Parfitt started the band. I really believed that. If anyone would have said to me, no, they didn't start it, and even Parfitt wasn't in it, you know, it would have been hard to believe. But because you're saying it, I believe it. You know?
Yeah, I think they very much became the face of, or the faces of Quo. And of course, they've been in, well, from the time they've been called Status Quo. I mean, Rick Parfitt didn't actually join until about 4 years after Francis Rossi. So, you know, it's quite a widespread. But I think that early period's not very well known because they had zero commercial success as the Scorpions or the Spectres, and even as Traffic Jam. You know, none of the stuff that they did then charted.
And can I ask you where the name came from? Because it's a cracking name. Because it's just a question mark, isn't it? Like,
absolutely.
Who are we? If you know what I mean. Who are you?
Anything, who are we? To be honest, I've never seen a sort of definitive answer to that particular question. Some bands, you know, the name just comes out of a conversation or whatever. I've never seen where that one comes from. But what's interesting is maybe it was ironic because Status Quo means sort of maintaining more of the same, whereas they were very much in 1970, and this is when, you know, metal was breaking. I mean, you could describe them as early metalish music, because Black Sabbath were coming to the fore, sort of 69, 70. And, you know, Status Quo are very much credited with creating the sort of heavy metal image, if you like, of the long hair, the head banging, the hair flying around everywhere. And they were very much at the forefront of that. So maybe over a few beers, they just decided that, you know, the ironic sound of Status Quo might be a bit of fun.
Yeah. And you know what? You know what you're saying, that, and the likes of, Black Sabbath, because all these bands, of that era and of those little mad names, Paranoia,
That's right. Yeah.
if you go back, like say from like when the Beatles started, and She Loves You and Love Me Do, and things like that. And say like they were going at the time of like the early Beatles, the very early Beatles, and someone came out and said Paranoia. You'd think, what's this lot?
You wouldn't believe it, would you?
It really was, because the Beatles were like clean cut, and by the time Paranoia came out, Ozzy Osbourne, absolutely.
Well, exactly,
brilliant.
biting heads off bats, which is a true story. What happened? Somebody threw a bat on stage, and he thought it was just a rubber bat. So in true Osbourne started grabbing it, bit his head off, and realised when the bat actually bit him back that it wasn't a piece of rubber. And apparently after the day, he was taken off to hospital for a tetanus jab.
But it was, wasn't it? Unless he turned into a little vampire like Ozzy Osbourne. But it's surprising, isn't it? And I'm talking about the time of the 60s.
Yeah.
And you had the likes of the clean cut Beatles until they changed, they changed into, what they wanted to change into, the likes of, say like Revolution.
Yeah, exactly.
Jansen, all that thing. And you had the Beach Boys as well. They were all clean cut, singing about surfing and, California girls and whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
So, as I mentioned about, and then you get the likes of, just after them, Meatloaf, the Bat Out of Hell, these bad songs, titles, brilliant.
Oh, absolutely. Brilliant. That was Jim Steinman wrote a lot of that stuff, wasn't it? Absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting. The first half of the 60s, I can remember, when we used to go to dances, you'd wear, a 3-button Italian suit. The beat era, sort of up to 65, it was all very much clean cut, short, smart hair, and suits. And it was really when rock music emerged in sort of 65, 66, 67 that it all changed, long hair and all the rest of it. And what's fascinating about the Quo is that, they weren't there. They were there in the beat era, but they never managed to make a success of it. They sort of, pictures of Matchstick Men towards the end of the 60s. But very few bands actually managed to move on to the next sort of era. But Status Quo, after they cracked on, they had a continuous run of singles that took them into the mid-80s. They had 2 or 3 or 4 hit singles every year, and that's pretty unheard of. That. But they have been the bad boys at times, or one particular famous time in 76. They were at Vienna Airport. They were touring round, and they got into a bit of a contretemps with the guards. I think one of them wanted to search them, and people they took umbrage to this, and I think a couple of fists were flown, and they were arrested.
In Vienna?
Yeah, in Vienna. And they ended up with a fine between them, about £3,500. The amount varies depending which report you read. Yeah. But around about 3 or 3.5 grand. So, they have had their moments. And again, you're talking about that. And it was like the sort of the bad boy image of, even... I'm not saying the Quo here, by the way, but hotels being trashed and things like that. So it was the bad boy image of rockers, if you know what I mean. Absolutely.
And at the time as well, outside, the bands and everything else, you had Hells Angels, and there was lots of things about Hells Angels. I think everyone was associated, these bad boys of rock, with Hells Angels sort of typecasting now. Can I just read a few? Mark Killis says, Found out the Quo played the original Cavern Club in the early 70s. Yeah, I do know that because it was there. Couldn't get in, by the way. I only ever got in the Cavern once, and that was 3 weeks before it shut.
Oh, wow.
3 weeks before it shut.
Yeah,
Once me and my mates were going down. The Dave Clark 5 was playing, and said, "Yeah, we go down and see." So we went down, and as you're talking about Italian suits, and I had crumbies on, and you know. Anyway, we were on the steps going down, and this drum just came bouncing down, and is it a lad named Benny Ambrose on the head, and he said that. And he started fighting, with Dave Clark himself. You know, we didn't know, you know. But anyway, we couldn't get in, and that was the end of us, because you had all the other people who were dressed in black duffel coats, if you know what I mean. And they were the rail caverners, if you like. They were the rail caverners, the black duffel coat brigade. But I'll just carry on reading this. Charlie Wood says, everyone said Quo only knew 3 chords. The truth is,
it's absolutely true.
They knew 4, but he says the truth is they knew 4. And Philip Jones, no, he doesn't mention anything about. I think the singers singing sound are so really good. Says, you know, so these are. I'm sorry about that. That actually, that thing there, that has nothing at all to do with what we're talking about. But Mark Kinney says, Derek, do you remember the 70s band Free, who did All Right Now?
Yeah.
The guitarist of that band died very young. Lead singer was Paul Rodgers. Yeah.
It was Paul Kossoff, the lead guitarist. He died, I think, in 76.
Was he any relation to David Kossoff, the British actor?
I'm pretty sure it was his son.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure it was his son.
I didn't know, because it's a very unusual name, Kossoff, isn't it?
That's right, yeah.
It's like your name, actually. You know, your surname, Shelmerdine.
Yeah, there aren't many others around.
No, I'll tell you something. It's only because of what you said and what I said, you know, was there any relation and an unusual name, Kossoff. Because there was Shelmerdine brothers, right? Mm-hmm. And their father, who were fantastic architects of Liverpool. And some of the work around Liverpool that they've done is phenomenal. Yeah. And it's still there today. And I show people all this, you know, what the Shelmerdines did. So there you go. And actually one of them, you know, which will be down your street, Thomas Shelmerdine, he built lodges and a couple of houses around Sefton Park. And one of the houses was where Stuart Sutcliffe lived with his family.
Wow.
How about that?
That's amazing, isn't it? Small world, as they say.
Your namesake. Oh, that's just a thing, you know. But anyway, Ray Thompson says, I more or less, this fella's from Portugal, by the way.
All right.
I more or less lived in the Liverpool Stadium back in the early 70s, Cross Keys pub across the road, saw Cream, Jethro Tull, Free, America UFO, Family. The list is endless. Now, him saying that, I went there with my girlfriends at the time, and I went down to see. It'll be interesting to you, this, Derek. It really will. I went down to see Mott the Hoople.
Yeah.
And Hawkwind, because it was right into them. So went down, and I said to the girl, Pauline, her name was, I said to Pauline Bennett, I said, Pauline, I said, you know, they were good, really. Now, what I'm talking about was the backup groups, you know, to get the crowd going, and you know, until the likes of Hawkwinds and Mott the Hoople came up, the supporting groups, I should have said. And I said, they were brilliant, weren't they? You know, and there was only a couple of them. And do you know who one of the supporting groups was? I had never had a clue.
Right.
Queen.
Oh,
Queen.
wow. Yeah, everybody starts somewhere.
You know, so,
Yeah.
and it's only what Ray Thompson said, you know, about going down there. And the old, it was a boxing stadium, and it was the very first purpose-built boxing stadium in the country.
Was
And
that the
what did we
Empire?
go and do? We knocked it down.
Oh, right.
We knocked it
Oh,
down. But there was great bands on there as well, as you know, I say, and as Ray Thompson said. My mate Jeff, who has a record shop on County Road, is a massive Hawkwind fan. Say
yeah.
Steve Evans, my mate Steve, and I have. Do you know the next time you're on, Terry? Would you do me a favour?
Okay.
You're gonna write this down, aren't you?
Yes.
Would you do something about Hawkwind?
Okay.
Could you give the background, just like what you're doing now about the Quo?
Yeah.
The shop is called Good Times Records, recommended for any vinyl collectors there. I suppose you've got millions of vinyls, haven't you, Jerry?
Well, I've had over the years, but I've been doing since the 80s. I've been doing record dealing and stuff, and I've sold an awful lot of them, awful lot of them off. It's great fun. I love record fairs. You get talking to people who have a real interest in a particular artist, and you find yourself having some fabulous conversations.
Well, Steve Evans himself, he's got a great record, you know, vinyl record collection, and that's all he plays is the vinyls, and it's coming back, isn't it? Am I right by saying vinyl is coming back?
Yeah, it's the biggest format now. They sell more vinyl than CDs. CDs are drifting away now. I think the CDs have been done away with by downloading, streaming rather. So it's done for that. But there's nothing like an album, you know, touching it, feeling it, holding it, looking at it. It's fantastic.
Well, do you know my first ever record I bought? And I saved up a little bit of pocket money, and you know, going on messages for your mum and other members of the family, or even a neighbour. You know, they give you trippings or whatever. Anyway, I saved enough up, and I went to buy a record. Right, I went to buy a record, and I tell you what I went to buy. And our Stevie came with me. He's older, right?
Yeah.
And he came with me, and my uncle Ronnie. So they were with me, you know. So anyway, he went down, and do you know what they forced me to buy?
No idea.
I never bought it. Please me. They forced me, and I mean forced, you know. They forced me to buy Jimmy Justice's
right.
A Rose in Spanish Harlem.
Yeah. Benny King cover.
I went back and I was crying. Anyway, my grandmother gave me the money, and she made my Uncle Ronnie come all the way, you know, with me to buy Please Me.
Yeah.
But that was the very first record, and I was forced to buy it.
Jimmy Justice, wow.
It's crazy, isn't it? Now, how many people on there, including Steve Evans, by the way, including everybody else, Mikey Lees or anyone, you know, how many would know Jimmy Justice?
Yeah, exactly.
Be very rare, Charlie Woods as well. But it's absolutely. But I'm sorry to butt in there.
No, it's fine.
Take away what you were talking about, the great Quo. So go ahead. Was the ever on like a decline? Because
they were 2 or 3 times. I mean, you know, we looked at a little bit ago. You know, the latter part of their time with Pi before they went with Vertigo and really developed that boogie trademark sound they became famous for. And it's funny you should say that, because by the time we get to the early 80s, the times are changing again. I mean, the last album with drummer John Coghlan was Never Too Late in 81, and he moved on. And what happened was basically he was just fed up of the same thing. Not just the 3-chord music, but I read some quote that said something like he enjoyed being in the band apart from the rehearsing, the touring, and the recording. So he really just wanted to move on and do something else. And he had a band called Diesel on the side, and he sort of developed that. And I think they're still on were much later still on the road. In the very early days, it was a sort of guest group of people that he knew in the business. And he was replaced by a guy called Pete Kirscher, who was with the band for a while. And then it was in 1982, an album called 1982, was when Andy Bown seems to be listed as part of Status Quo, as opposed to being listed as a session musician or a pickup tour musician. And that was the first album that Pete Kirscher was on. So again, they were moving off in another direction. But now Alan Lancaster, the guy that actually, originally, if you like, founded the band back in '62, he got himself an Australian fiancée. I think he actually married her. And he went out to Australia to live. So we're now around 1983. And they were, he was playing on a loose basis. So they were sort of going forward. But, if your bass guitarist lives in Australia, it's going to be a bit limiting for touring and recording. And in January '84, they embarked on the End of the Road tour, which was widely advertised at the time as what it says it was. On the tin, it was as far as they were going. And then Andy Lancaster actually left after that. And in '85, they did a couple of solo projects. Rick Parfitt had a solo album, which to this day I think is still unreleased. Certainly, I don't think it's ever had an official release. And Francis Rossi worked with a guy called Bernard Frost, and they released a single called Modern Romance in '85. It got to 54, so it wasn't really going to change the world. And then the career got kick-started. They got invited to open Live Aid on the 13th of July '65. And apparently they weren't very happy about being the first band on. They played for about 16 minutes, I think.
85.
Oh, absolutely.
Not 65, you said 60.
Oh, did I say 65?
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah. No, 85. Absolutely. Yeah, they
I
were.
I thought they were brilliant. I really thought that they were great.
Yeah.
Them and Queen were fantastic. Can I just mention a few of their names here?
Yeah.
Charlie Woodsey, I'll just go down because they're very important, actually. Charlie Woodsey's albums used to be an event, like watching a movie. We used to play the A-side, Cup of Tea, and play the B-sides, which is absolutely right, by the way. Absolutely right, because, bands at the time, especially the Beatles, I love the Beatles.
Yeah.
And they always had a great B-side, didn't they? That was to sell. Charlie Cairn says CD and don't sound the same as, let the record, the vinyls. Steve Mulholland, hello, Sneo, if you will. I grew up in the 70s with Status Quo, Slade, and later Thin Lizzy. My first gig was AC/DC in 1979 at the Empire. In the 80s, I got into Iron Maiden. So these are all the heavy stuff, aren't they? The Diesel.
Yeah. And
Steve Evans, I'll finish off with this and then get back to you. Sorry, Derek.
That's all right.
To you. Steve Evans says, the LP I do want is Son of Anastasia by the late, great Jimmy Campbell. But that is about between 200 and 300 vinyl, not cheap.
No, it's the problem. Yeah, a lot of 70s albums are very collectible.
It shows you. Did you know what records I had? An album, and it was signed.
Oh, wow.
and it was signed to Frank, but
Oh
it wasn't
wow.
this Frank, right? But it was signed to Frank, and the proper signature and everything. It wasn't
Yeah.
like you or I putting it on or whatever.
Mm,
It was actually signed to this Frank, and it was in pristine condition.
mm.
And do you know who it was by? It's destroyed now, by the way. I won't
Oh,
tell you how it's destroyed, but it's destroyed. And it was by Fats Domino.
mm.
Fats Domino.
Oh, amazing. I love Fats Domino.
Fats Domino signed it to some fella named Frank. Best wishes, Frank. Love
Amazing.
Fats.
Yeah.
Fats Domino. The full title,
Yeah,
Fats
yeah.
Domino.
Brilliant.
And it's gone.
Yeah.
Frank, my old mate Alan Crooks from Surrey was Status Quo manager.
Oh, wow.
They had a nasty breakup with a lot of accusations of fraud, and that's Ray Smith.
Yeah.
He's saying that. Just shows
Yeah,
you, doesn't it?
yeah, that was common, sadly, particularly in the
Of course, Colin.
70s. I remember.
You got to look at the Beatles as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, they sued Klein, Stones sued Klein,
Yeah.
Pink Floyd sued one of their early managers. I remember seeing an interview with the bass player with Jimi Hendrix, Noel Redding, shortly before he died, and he was saying he was still struggling, trying to sue the record company, and or not to sue, still struggling trying to get money out of his old record company and management, and they never earned more than a daily wage, weekly wage when it was with Jimi Hendrix and the Experience. And that was so common the way. I mean, now your Ed Sheerings, they have a hit record, they're millionaires. I mean, the music business has changed, I think, a bit.
Well, I've got a couple of questions for you there.
Okay.
Well, this isn't a question, but it's Lynn Ellis, and she says, hang on, wish I still had the same song, Both Sides of Paranoid by Black Sabbath.
Oh, yeah.
Steve Evans says, yeah, this is a question for you. Now, I might give you time to think as I read through it. Okay. Frank, ask Derek what's his favourite LP of the 60s. And as he says, Steve Evans, that is, he says, mine's Forever Changes by Love. That's
brilliant. Yeah, I was really into Love. I think a couple that spring to mind are Jimi Hendrix's first album. When you sort of live through the era and you buy them when they come out. The thing about Hendrix, and the Pink Floyd would be another one that springs to mind, first album, you'd never, ever heard anything like it before. And I can remember with the Hendrix one, I bought it, jumped on the bus. I was in a sort of local semi-pro band at the time. LP in hand on the bus up to the bass player's house. Buns, mate, you must listen to this. This is absolutely awesome. And I had Cream's second album, Disraeli Gears, and I thought that was pretty awesome as well. But I was quite into that West Coast sound. I was actually always preferred Love to Doors, and I was quite a big fan of a Country Joe and the Fish. The Vietnam, the Rag one, and stuff. I mean, there was just so much great music around. I mean, across the Beat era as well. I was more of a Stones fan than a Beatles fan. At the time, you seemed to be in one of two camps. I remember I was in school one day and somebody says, hey, you're a Beatles fan or a Stones fan? I said, well, I'm more on the Stones side. He said, I'm on the Beatles. This other guy with us, lad. He said, oh, Dave Clark 5 are my favourite. Yo, what? Oh,
well, you can take the Stones and the Beatles, and yeah, but when you start talking about Dave Clark 5, like bits and pieces and Glads all over, that was about it for me.
Yeah,
but if you look at the competition,
yeah,
because we had the Mersey Sound, and he was nothing like the Mersey Sound.
Oh,
You know,
absolutely.
some of the bands were extraordinary.
Absolutely.
They were out of
Absolutely.
this world.
Yeah.
And then you had the London. Now, the London scene tried to take over.
Mm.
So you had the, the up and coming Stones, they listen to these. And then the likes of the Dave Clark Five, this is the London scene. They were trying to, I think they were a bit jealous actually, because there was no one, even Stones include, I like the Stones, I think everybody liked the Stones, but they were more too bluish for blues, not bluish.
Oh, absolutely. It was more the sort of R&B scene, because of course you got people like John Mayall and Alexis Corner driving a lot of the scene there, because a lot of people went through those two bands. Another 60s band I absolutely loved was The Who. I saw them in the early days because obviously they toured around that area as well. So, when like My Generation was their current hit single, and Mooney would absolutely destroy his drum kit at the end of the set. Absolutely.
Well, do you know who my favourite London group were? And I seen them live. They were absolutely outstanding. Outstanding. Now, I seen the Beatles live, by the way, when I was 13, 14, right? Up at the Locarno, it's the Olympia now. But I couldn't even hear them, I'm being honest. I couldn't hear them. At least I've seen them live.
Yeah.
My favourite band out of London was the Small Faces.
Oh, fabulous band. Absolutely.
They were exceptional live. Honestly, they were exceptional. The sounds are just like the sound, on vinyl, if you know what I mean. I'll just read a few things here. Charlie Wood says, you can't talk about Quo without mentioning Bob Young. I want to go back to that, by the way. Steve Evans says, going to see Love revisited in June at the O2 Academy at the O2 Academy. Original guitarist Johnny Eccles still playing. Small Faces, Ogden's is up there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Stanley Owen. And he carries on by saying, now I want to go back to you, Derek, because you said something before and I didn't want to interrupt you because I was listening with intent. Steve Evans says, other 60s bands, the Beatles, Revolver, Kinks, Village Green, Who, My Generation, Stones, Let It Bleed, Doors, The Soft Parade. And Mark Kinney says, my mum always said best live band she ever heard was Queen. Okay, that's what his mum said. Now, when you were speaking about McLaughlin, leaving Quo, right? I always wondered why he left. And I think I got told that, I'm not saying, I think I got told, and I'm going back years ago, because I thought he was a fantastic drummer, by the way. First class. And I got told that he and Rossi had a big breakup, and Rossi chased him. That's what I was told. But I made up that it was you who put the record straight. And that's why I really thought that Rossi started off the band, but he did become leader of the band, didn't he?
Oh, very much so. Yeah, very much so.
Mikey Lee says, I saw Mick Jagger as lead singer and Charlie Watts with Alexis Corner, who you mentioned before, down at the Cavern, circa 1961.
Yeah.
Isn't that incredible?
Yeah.
That's incredible, that.
Yeah. Charlie Watts was still actually semi-professional at that time. He was a graphic designer. He didn't actually turn pro until he joined the Stones. Absolutely incredible. But he's another one that's a jazz drummer. A lot of these rock drummers come from jazz backgrounds.
Yeah.
Ginger Baker always shouted at anybody who called us Cream a rock band. We are a jazz band, he said. We were a jazz band. He really did come from serious jazz.
But the Cavern was serious jazz.
Oh, absolutely. Ray Sinter, the guy who first owned it. It was founded as a jazz club named after Le Cave, whatever the French for cave is, in Paris. And he really hated rock and roll. Famously sent John Lennon when the Quarrymen played there the first time. John Lennon broke into a couple of Elvis songs. The Quarrymen, led by John Lennon, broke into a couple of Elvis songs. And Sinter apparently sent a note to the stage, "Cut out the bloody rock." Nobody's ever seen the note, but it's widely reported.
Well, if you could imagine the clientele, because the likes of Humphrey Lillerton, he was from the aristocracy, what people didn't realise, by the way. So he was down there, and these people were dressed, the way they were dressed, these jazz people. And you had the likes of Kenny Ball and his jazzmen. They played there. So you can imagine the clientele that was actually in the original Cavern before it became the Cavern that, I wanted to go to but could never get it.
Well, you see,
the likes of Mikey Lees, going down there to see. That's brilliant, that. Lead singer, Mick Jagger and Charlie Watts with Alexa's Corner.
Oh, awesome.
Down at the Cavern.
Incorporated. Yeah.
1961.
Oh, that'd be awesome. I mean, Paul Jones is a lead singer. Mick Jagger was a lead singer with him. Charlie Watts was actually part of the band when, and Brian Jones were part of the band, Blues Incorporated. When they met Mick, they went to see a gig, and Charlie and Brian were actually playing with the band when they met Keith and Mick.
Well, Mike, these are great. That's why everyone's made up when you come on here. Hang on, where am I? Right, so just read these two from Mark Kinnish and Mikey Lees. Derek, I heard the Status Quo played the Cavern thing. They hated it, though. Was fact they couldn't jump about on the stage because of the arches. So that's what Mark says. But anyway, Mikey Lee says, Derek, I remember John Lennon and the Quarrymen being told, how about this? This is John Lennon being told to quit the rock and roll.
No, that's right.
Just imagine it. Being told, a young lad, a very young lad, and you're being told to quit, and you go, yeah, well, that's it. I'm going to do whatever, become a painter or whatever. And Patricia Cowley says, I got onto this. Patricia Cowley. Good morning from Tokoroa, New Zealand. I love your live streams. Yeah, Derek, you've got to. From Patricia Cowley. And Steve Evans says, more 60s. Do you know what? I've got something on my computer and I can't read that. I don't know what that is. LPs, Sinatra Cycles, Led Zepp 2. The already mentioned Jimmy Campbell, more 60s great LPs.
Oh, there's so many. I mean, really were. And it was a great time.
Have you mentioned, don't forget, you got to ask the question. You got to ask the question before we leave. You're coming on again, aren't you, Derek?
Absolutely. Look, we talk about Hawkwind, if you like, yeah.
Is that okay with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Just worth mentioning that, quote, I mean, they had another incarnation in the mid-'80s, started about 86 and sort of rolled forward. And that was Rossi Parfitt and Andy Bound and John Rhino Edwards on bass and Jeff Rich on drums. But, I mean, the 2000s is really interesting. Mentioned they're famous for their 3 chords, and they've got a sense of humour. In 2007, they set up their own record label called Fourth Chord Records. And that same year, they released an album called, and I love this, In Search of the Fourth Chord. I thought that was brilliant. Shows a real sense of humour. You know, somebody who can laugh at themselves is cool. And I'm a big Coronation Street fan. And they featured in a storyline in 2005 on Coronation Street, a sort of Les Battersby story where Battersby had apparently pushed Rossi off the stage and damaged his hearing. So they beat him up.
Where's Battersby?
And then a beer named after them in 2014, Witchwood Brewery named an album Pile Driver. And apparently when it was launched, it was only available in Wetherspoons for a week or something, and then it was available widely. I mean, how many bands have had, or people have had, a beer named after them, essentially?
Exactly.
It's brilliant.
I've actually got I don't know whether it's, I forget what it's called, but it's named after me, some flower. Up in the Southport Flower Show, they did this, I don't know what it's called, but, and they said, we've named it after you, Frank. I said, oh, thanks. I never even met this gentleman in my life, you know, but he sent a message through to somebody, and I got the message. Anyway, have you told us what your favourite LP is before we go?
Oh, absolute favourite. I think it might be The Who's My Generation. I absolutely love that album.
Evans, you know, we mentioned My Generation. And I'll just finish off by saying these, but I'll have to say goodbye. I'm sorry.
No problem.
Margie Roberts, evening Frank, evening Margie. Lynn Ellis says, the 1960s and 70s music will never die. Totally agree there, Mikey. Lynn, I'm sorry. Mikey Lee says, Frank, I think I told you to get onto this. Get onto this, Derek. Frank, I think I told you before, I saw the Quarrymen, the Silver Beatles, and then the Beatles over 70 times.
Wow.
How about that?
Brilliant.
And we've got to finish on that. Derek,
absolutely.
Superb again. Thank you so much for, please, you know, the next time that you're on, look up for me, Hawkwind.
Yep, absolutely.
If you can, how they got the name, you know, the members, because honestly, and you've got to say about Silver Machine, that's one of the greatest rock things I've ever heard. I love it. I really love it.
Yeah, I saw the Hammersmith Odeon. They were brilliant.
You rock, Derek says. Mikey Lee, how about that?
Oh, thank you very much.
No, he just don't. You say he does, Mikey. He rocks on it, you know, as everyone's saying there, you know, brilliant comments and whatever. And it's I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I've got to go for the next hour now. We're late. We've run over 6 minutes late. But anyway, it's just for me to say, Francis Rossi's mother was born in Crosby, says David Owens.
Wow.
And like, I didn't know it was his mother. Yeah, and David is a historian and he's a great archivist. So whatever David says, believe it. Believe it. Why it's 110%. But Derek, I'm awfully sorry. We've got to go. Is that okay with you?
Oh, it's fine. I really enjoyed it, Frank. Really enjoyed
it. Is it okay if we just leave an open invite to you anytime you want to come on?
Okay, yeah, I'll arrange something with
Jason.
Yeah, not a problem. I look forward
so
to it, mate. I enjoy it.
And maybe we could have a special, a 2-hour one at one point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that okay with you?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, that's a date then. That's a date.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Derek.
My pleasure,
it's just for me to mention Derek again and Derek's book, which is called Rock'n'Roll Unravelled. If you haven't got a copy, get yourselves one. Honestly, get yourselves one. It's absolutely fantastic. Okay, so
UK bookshop.
Sorry?
You can order it at any UK bookshop.
Any UK bookshop, you can order it. You can order it, as Derek has told you from his own lips. So just for me to say a big thank you to Derek. We'll see it again. It's open for you anyway, so I'm not going to say when. It's entirely up to you. And I'm just going to now put a clip on so I can make a cup of tea. So here's a historical clip.
What